Hi there, I'm Tammy Lee Meyer, and welcome to this peer-to-peer podcast on the Credit Commons. Today, I'd like to welcome Matthew Slater and Ross Gentleman. Matthew Slater is a currency expert and has helped to create software for hundreds of lets and communities around the world who are looking to have alternative currencies. I also sit on the board of the credit union, and I've been over the last few years, really looking at some new solutions for some of our economic challenges. And so I would welcome both Matthew Slater and Ross Gentleman.
Thank you, Tammy.
Hello.
So maybe we could start with a bit of an intro. Matthew, if you can talk a little bit about the work that you've done over the last few years in helping develop community currencies and being support for that, that would be fantastic.
Well, I've been making open source software in a framework called Drupal, which means that any Let's or any time bank can have complete control over their own little social networking site and also control over the accounting. And then the members log in and they record their transactions, and the website adds them all up, a bit like a bank when you do online banking. So I've been doing this for 100, 150 Let's groups centered around French-speaking Europe. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been able to partner with CES, which is a larger network doing the same thing. And so now I'm working with CES to bring the two, if not together, then at least into a deeper interoperability. And the idea being that local currencies are much more powerful and much more interesting if they're interoperable, which means if you can use them in different places other than with 100 or so people, which is the typical size of one of these projects.
That would be better. Yes, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And Ross, maybe you can do a little intro on some of the work that you've been doing over the last few years.
Well, I've been managing Canada's Radical Little Credit Union for the last 3 years in Vancouver, and we view ourselves as a community development engine, and we try to provide conventional, in the sense not local currency, finance opportunities to socially redeeming projects. And as a consequence of that, we extend ourselves beyond what would be termed the conventional or monetized economy into a variety of other value sets where people are actually valuing either environmental or social or other rewards that accrue to the community. And I think that's where there's an interface with local area currencies or time banking concepts.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ross. So kind of breaking into the Credit Commons idea, maybe Matt, you can do, first of all, can we start with LETS? Because maybe perhaps not everyone knows what LETS stands for or what it is.
Okay, LETS usually stands for a local exchange trading system. And for me, the really interesting element of that is the emphasis on exchange. Because exchange is really not what conventional money is all about. People understand that money is supposed to have two main functions, the medium of exchange and the store of value. But really, the money we use every day is optimized to be a store of value, and also other things which go with that, like investment and risk management and things like that. And the medium of exchange functionality is completely sidelined. It's secondary. And that's why we can have a recession because all the interest rates are wrong and the banks don't want to lend, and we don't have enough medium of exchange. And it's because the quantity of the medium of exchange in circulation is simply not a political priority. In a LETS and in these mutual credit models, the system exists only to offer a medium of exchange facility to its members. And so it doesn't say that this money is valuable and that you have to buy it first or dig it out the ground first. It says money is an agreement between the members in the circle, and we can just issue it. And it's issued usually as credit between the members. So that means if I want to do something with you, Ross, and you want to pay me $10 worth, then you can just write me an IOU, and the IOU can circulate as money until it comes back to you. And so that's a form of credit, and it's interest-free credit, and it works within our circle only, and it's free to create, and it's abundant, or at least sufficient. So there's no problem about the scarcity of credit, because we just issue it to each other as far as we can trust each other. We can have as much as we like. And so for me, what the LETs are doing, or what they could be doing, is enabling people to exchange much more freely within their communities without having to worry about not having enough money just to measure how much they're giving to each other. You don't need something valuable to measure. Does that make sense?
Ross, I'd love you, Ross, to jump in with a couple questions, because I've got some, but over to you.
It makes sense to me, Matthew, and I'll just reframe some of what you said in language that to me makes some sense. That what you have done is created essentially a money currency, and people do not settle by virtue of an exchange immediately. One of the parties accepts a deferred settlement on the exchange, which can be returned to them not by the other party, but by a third party or a fourth party or a fifth party that's part of the multi-party arrangement.
That's exactly what it is, yeah.
Nicely done.
I don't think of it, I'm not issuing money, by the way. I'm creating accounting systems. I think it's helpful to point out that in a mutual credit system, you're not really issuing money or creating anything. You're just logging mutual debts between each other on a ledger. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, but I don't think there's as big a distinction between an ephemeral currency that's called a credit, or a dollar that might be passed as a nominal IOU.
Okay.
So one of the places where I think that this conversation is really interesting is in having agency around how we create value, because I think that that's one of the missing links. And one of the things that I'd like to see is for us to more easily be able to create value. So that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about what the Credit Commons can provide, because they're, in us creating understanding about how we create value, and actually creating that value in community has value. Oh gosh, I've said value too much now.
So let's just distinguish between a mutual credit system, or one of these closed circles that I've been describing, which enables the members to create value for each other and to exchange it, and between the Credit Commons as a concept which enables all of those to be linked together with a meta mutual credit structure, or even a nested mutual credit structure. So if you're concerned about creating value in communities, what you need is a way of measuring and exchanging value to encourage people to create value. But in terms of the global picture, what we need is a payment backbone. very similar to what the banks have with SWIFT and other systems like that.
Right.
And it's the payments backbone, which is the Credit Commons.
And so functionally, what would that backbone be doing?
The backbone would be a way for any local system or any group to connect to everything else and then issue credit between groups using a protocol. So it would be like a group of groups.
And can we talk a little bit about the unit of exchange? Like how would we decide or agree upon a unit of exchange?
Do you mean in a group or between the groups?
Both.
Well, within a group, very often in community currencies in the solidarity economy, hours are used because they're very, very universal and easy to understand, although some people think they're actually not very fair. Between the groups, can you tell me what the unit of account is when you switch between dollars and euros?
Well, I mean, I suppose you'd agree upon a agreed upon number for that exchange.
Right, so you don't always have to have an intermediary unit of account. You just have to be able to agree the price of one in terms of the price of the other. And in the case of the dollar-euro market, that's done according to supply and demand. But in the Credit Commons, there's a whole philosophically different approach that says if we're issuing a currency, we decide how much it's worth. We can negotiate it with other groups. And as long as we give as much as we receive, then that will work. It only doesn't work if we set a stupid rate that we can't keep, and suddenly we find that we're importing much more than we're exporting, or vice versa, and things go out of balance. Now that's fine if it's between euros and dollars, because they can just create more euros and dollars, and then they get lodged in the other country's treasury. But between two community currency systems which want to exchange rather than accumulate, they need to ensure that the exchange rates are sufficiently accurate that imports and exports balance. And so there needs to be a political process around that as well.
Right. Ross, I can see you thinking over there, and I'm going to pass it to you.
Well, I think your description thus far, Matthew, is good. It's graspable. One of the issues that you surface in your paper, but then glance over it, in my mind, is how this 100 people here with one time banking system, this 100 people here with a local area trading system, and another few such groups can exchange among themselves from one group to the other, and that's the credit common idea. But the negotiations among them, any two parties or three parties or four parties, to determine what the not using the term exchange rate. I note that you in your paper choose the term conversion rate, but just trying to negotiate what that conversion rate might be. It's a mechanical process or a technological process of some kind and a governance process of some kind that is not as easily determined, I think, in my mind. So an example or two of how that might work would probably be helpful.
Well, we don't have a lot of experience in the communities currencies movement of how best to do this. And so I look forward to good practices emerging. Is that a sufficient answer?
It's insufficient, but it's understandable.
I don't think it's an insoluble problem. I think communities, if they want to exchange, they will work out exchange rates or conversion rates.
And I think that's where scale starts to present a difficult challenge, because I think in the model at the local area level, people know each other. And I think you used the term in the paper, trust is inherent. But as you build up to these larger scale interactions where you have a few hundred people and a few hundred people, or 1,000 people and 1,000 people, you're moving into a terrain that would likely mimic the bureaucratic institutions that we've created over time in the denominated monetized economy. There's a challenge.
If the larger the average size of the circles, the flatter the credit commons structure would be, and the fewer layers of politics there would be. But if a credit circle was only, say, 5 people, and you wanted to include the whole economy, 5 people, 5 entities, then you'd have a very, very tall, narrow structure, and there would be lots and lots of different layers of governance, which might get very cumbersome. So we need to find the right balance there. But governance certainly is time-consuming, and probably should be a bit time-consuming, because it's through governance that we relate to each other and we build the trust, if not through trade itself.
So for our little credit union, one of the things that I've been really wanting to foster is a deeper connection between our members. They are definitely already cohorts of people that are in our membership that know each other, and there's things that they could do to both help each other as well as support each other and even trade. And so I guess I'm also wondering how we at the credit union could test out some of these ideas and look into how we can support better connecting our members and trading those things of value that we have that are not necessarily monetary.
Can I invite Ross to explain a bit more about what he said in the introduction when he talked about other kinds of values being around?
Oh, I think we have determined over time at the credit union that there are social needs that may be identified by groups of people in the community, whether it could have been childcare or more latterly it might be something like access to medical marijuana, where groups of people have come together to say, hey, from a social needs perspective, we want to respond to this social need. And the credit union said those are the kinds of social responses that we want to foster. We don't want to say those are marginal initiatives in the larger community. That is where social change originates, and we want to foster those groups of people who take on social issues of whatever kind. So that's a value that we have identified within the credit union and said we want to provide conventional support to, by conventional banking services and potentially loans. So one of the first loans that we made was to a parent-led childcare facility. So we recognized some value beyond simply what could be determined to be a financial relationship, about a loan being made and return on investment or return on the loan. And so similarly, we have gone on to make similar kinds of commitments to housing co-ops, to environmental activist groups and other groups where we see a value there that's not really defined in terms of its financial reward to our membership. It's defined by a larger benefit to the community as a whole.
Okay, because I thought you were talking about measuring valuable things in something other than dollars, but you were talking about sort of values-driven lending policy.
Yes, and I think we still play at a relatively small level and I get involved in social investment, social impact investment conversations and similar impact investment conversations, where the scale of the operations at the securities level or at the larger deposit-taking institutions level, they try and develop metrics along the lines of which I think you're alluding to. We have not gone down that path very far. We tend to be more of a street-level, grassroots, project-based organization.
And that means you know what's valuable. You don't necessarily have to measure it because you can see it.
That's a fair comment.
It's the distance from the impact that makes those distant lenders want to get a metric for what the impact is or how much it is, and they also want to compare it with other things they might lend it to. But that's
Yes.
very, very difficult, and some people think you shouldn't be trying to do that at all. But then how do you decide where to put your millions of billions?
Yes, when you build huge organizations, you have that kind of challenge. And you by default, because you've aggregated so much activity and risk and decision making into your enterprise, you develop these great matrices of decision making and measurement.
So I guess from my perspective, I'm looking at our members, I'm looking at our membership, I'm looking at the current state of the world, I'm looking at the fact that banking itself is a challenge that we need to humanize. And for me, credit unions are a place to look at how we give financial services to our members in a way that embodies our values. And I mean, one of the most important things to me about a credit union is that our members are our owners. And so in speaking of governance and speaking of looking into the future of what it is that we can provide and what we can do, I think that there needs to be much more interaction between our members and ourselves. And so part of the reason why I think that having a way for our members to really see what each other are doing and, you know, trade needs and assets and resources together that are not necessarily just monetary, is for us to get a wider picture of the financial system that we're in that isn't well thought through or well developed or just, and start to create some ways to be able to bring more just frameworks like the Credit Commons and to move that forward. And so I just wanted to put part of that in our framing of the conversation, because it is systems change that we're talking about, and I wanted to put my finger right on that.
I think it's helpful to distinguish between finance, where finance is about the management of money, more usually the lending and borrowing of money between people, and a much broader sense of the economy, which includes everything we do for each other, which might count as building wealth or creating value. And so the credit union, in its narrow mission, is about finance. It's about financing worthwhile or needy people to get through the next week or month, I think. Is that fair?
I think I follow your thought there, and I would not dispute that we're more tied up into conventional finance model, conventional monetized economy model.
Mm-hmm. But maybe a rounder mission statement would include all kinds of economic well-being for the members, and maybe even to see the members as a community where there's a level of codependence and cooperation amongst them. And then you've got an entity to which you can offer services and infrastructure because they're all working together in a coordinated way. And that's where a system of exchange would come in, or even before that, the precursor to a system of exchange is what Tammy's talking about, where you build a directory, so you make visible the wealth that everyone is or can create.
Yes, and there are increments there, and Tammy can jump in here, but I think I agree with what you just said. There's a kind of a directory level, then there's potentially an exchange network level or time banking model, and then there's a potential to say, well, how does one's local network or trust agreement relate to other similar trusts in the context of what you're conceptualizing as the credit commons?
Right, and that's quite a long way down the road from where you are at the moment.
I
But
think
it's a
so, but
pressing question for the existing community currencies who are already networking.
yes. But Tammy, to get back to part of what you get at there, um, I think there's an issue here with what I used to think of as the formal economy and the informal economy, but now I'll talk about it as the monetized conventional economy and the remainder of the economy, which I think is partly mapped by what time banking and local area trading systems and other reciprocal arrangements that are not monetized try to acknowledge and respect, because most of us will do things every day for which we are uncompensated. Our lives are economic enterprises, and not all of it is monetized. And I think what we're talking about in part is developing an understanding of our lives that is broader than the monetized economy.
Yes.
Also note that the use of the word informal economy usually means cash in hand tax avoidance.
Which
So
is
the broader economy might be a better term.
okay. Thank you, Matthew. So, as far as where the Credit Commons is at, the development of it, Matthew, where is it at, and how can people help? How can people participate? What do you need?
It's purely at the conceptual stage. I'm sure there'll be a link to the white paper underneath this video. What do we need? It needs so much. It's not about what I need or what the Credit Commons needs. It's about what the world needs to do.
Right.
And what the world needs to do is relocalize its economy and rethink how it deals with money and rethink what it means to live in community. Because at the moment, we're moving towards a globalized community, which is really, really unhelpful because it's got many, many layers of bureaucracy, and we don't even know what's going on top. It's not being properly built so that members can participate. So for a more abundant future, we need to get better at building our own economic structures, including currencies and systems of exchange. And the Credit Commons is merely an indicator of a good direction to be going in that way. So what's needed is lots of teaching and explaining and design work and community development. And that can be done through a sort of vehicle of the Credit Commons as an idea of a structure we should be building, or it could be done through many other vehicles. It's all good. I'm not sure
So
that's the answer you were looking for.
let me ask a question. Currently, if I relocate from one community where there is a time banking or local area trading system in place, and I have a positive a positive balance in
Or a
my
negative one.
account, and I want to move to another neighborhood, another community across the continent or wherever, where there's a similar community-based local area trading system or time banking system, is there any way for me to take the accrued value in one and transfer it to the other?
Accrued or deficit value. It depends
Or
entirely on what those systems are. If they were both members of CES, possibly the largest one in the world, then that would be no problem because CES already does that and it has those agreements in place. But if you were moving from a time bank in USA to a time bank in Britain, well, sorry, that's not a good example. If you're moving from a time bank's USA time bank into one that's in our world, they have no agreements between them. So you'd be left begging the system administrators to, debit one account in one system and credit another account in another system. And it would probably take you months because they're not very strong on system administration and answering emails.
And you haven't built the credit commons yet.
Well, the credit commons would be there for them both to connect to and to be a third-party record between both of them, and a place to lodge the extent to which credit can be exchanged between. Because if 100 people moved from one network to another network, you create a massive imbalance, and you need to find a way that that those credits could come back.
Yes.
Yes.
Because that's what exchange means.
So the CES network that you're referring to, is that dominant in the UK, or where does it play a large role?
It started in South Africa, so it's strong there, but then it's been picked up very much in Spain and also in Australia. But if you look at the map, they're really everywhere.
Okay.
And maybe you can just give a couple of examples of some LET systems and what they're trading.
Well, let's take LETs and time banks as very similar. So these are very often neighbor-to-neighbor services, sometimes second-hand goods as well. So babysitting is very common. Driving people around is common. In America, there's a lot of driving for kidney dialysis purposes, which is not something I've ever seen in England, but it seems very common. Help with decorating or preparing meals. Those kinds of services?
Yes. Okay.
They're kinds of things that normally you wouldn't pay for, or you'd pay a nominal fee. So it's not counted as the conventional economy at all. And as such, LETS doesn't usually take away or detract from tax revenue.
It's an add-on. It's adding on value.
Yeah, it's a complementary currency to the main currency without eating away at its market share.
So,
but I'm going to reintroduce one other word that I used a moment ago, though, because I think there is a fundamental sense here, local groups of reciprocity, that people are doing things, and in the end, it's all going to return to them in some other shape and form, but they're sharing some of their time and skills or whatever, and it's all going to return back to them, and there's both a giving and a receiving inevitable within the network.
Yeah, these systems break down so they don't break down. They start to go skewy if people receive more than they give or give more than they receive. So if that's the intention, and it is the intention very often in time banks, they're viewed as volunteering tools, not reciprocation tools. So you need to have different rules around the currency to do that. So I've been talking, or we've been talking so far, all about exchange, which is the word I opened with, and mutual credit systems. But if you want a volunteering tool, then you can't insist that everybody gets back to zero balance. Or you have to have some way to. What tends to happen is you volunteer for a central body which has an account, and it pays you out of that account, and that account goes negative, a long way negative. And then there's some circulation of the units between the members, but eventually they end up accruing in the accounts of people who are volunteering a lot. And those people have no intention ever of spending that, or of indeed making it an exchange. So those points represent hours given as a gift to the community. It's almost a reputation metric,
Yes.
more than a medium of exchange. And you see how it's a sliding scale between a system of exchange and a system that acknowledges volunteering. But they have to have slightly different rules, because in the system of exchange, everything needs to end at zero, meaning everyone's given as much as they received. And in a system of volunteering, you need to have a way of issuing the new hours at the rate at which people want to accumulate them, so that you have the right number of hours in circulation at any time. So these are design questions, and they're very interesting.
One of the things that I love about these ideas is that it's circular and it's circulating, and in our current economic system, there's a lot of hoarding going on where money isn't moving, and so as a way to model a healthier economic ecosystem, I think this is a fantastic exploration and experiment.
Well, it's the separation of money for exchange and money as a store of value to be hoarded. The problem is we're using the same money for both, and so they're eating into each other's effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly the store of value is eating into the effectiveness of the medium of exchange, because the value is stored and then not available for exchange.
Right. Do you have any great wrap-up questions for us, Ross?
No, I think when you and I have subsequent conversations, you'll be pursuing the issue of how can we mobilize some of these ideas locally. And I appreciate that question, or those questions, are present, and that really is something that we have to deal with at our local level.
Yes. So Matthew, of course, we'll put a link to your white paper. Is there any other websites that you'd like to let people know to click on? And of course, we'll add those links as well.
Well, the creditcommons.net.
Wonderful. And of
That's
course,
where the white paper is. Sorry. Yeah.
great. And we'll put that link in the comments, as well as the link to CCEC Credit Union. I'd like to thank you both for this time today. And Matthew, any final thoughts?
Just that there's another thing you can do. When you have a community and a financial, an accounting system, you can make a currency where people are lending each other not arbitrary units and not hours, but promises of money. So you can keep account of promises of money and zero them all out as a complement to the members' relationships with the credit union. And you can do all of these things on one platform. So just wanted to leave you with that idea.
Okay, so I could promise to do something for another member, maybe do a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be something that, can you follow that through for me?
Well, if you're doing something with somebody and there's a material cost incurred, like petrol, gasoline, you might call it, then they can pay you for doing that, and they can pay you for 2 hours of your time and $3 for the gas in your tank. But they don't actually give you the $3 because they might not be there at the time, or they might not have it in cash. So you just record that debt on the same system,
As a prompt.
and then the $3 can be passed around as another form of credit, but one that's actually worth $3.
Right.
That's exciting. Any final thoughts for you, Ross?
Not at the moment. I'll take some of this stuff and mull it over, but it's fun to talk to, and I'm glad to have someone like Matthew provoking us to think a little bit more creatively and inventively about how we interact with money in particular, but how we interact with each other essentially.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for your time today, and I look forward to further conversations. Until next time.
It was good to meet you, Ross.
Good to see you again.